And I'll turn the mic on to make it official. Lord Jesus, thank you for this night, for your word, for fellowship, for friendship that's based around your word. There's nothing sweeter. Nothing sweeter. I understand, Lord. On Sunday, it was like you said, they're noisy, but I love it before church. And I think that's the goodness when saints gather together to lift your name up and glorify you, to praise you, to give you honor, to worship you, and to study your word, to grow in your word. And I thank you that we're going to do that tonight. I know you're going to bless this night. It's not going to be because of something I do, Lord. To you be the glory and all the credit. Thank you, my Jesus. So we're working kind of for a while here. We're going to kind of go around in some circles, and we're going to talk about the Olivet Discourse. And I'm going to say some stuff that might make you mad, and I'm going to say some stuff that I hope makes you think. And I hope that I don't say anything that's wrong. I'm not going to push any great windows, but I do have a little different perspective than most do when it comes to the Olivet Discourse. We spoke about it last week. We began last week. But let's go back further, and let's start with a look at Deuteronomy 18. Just a couple verses from there. And if you say in your heart, how shall we know the word which the Lord has not spoken? When a prophet speaks in the name of the Lord, if the thing does not happen or come to pass, that is the thing which the Lord has not spoken. The prophet has spoken it presumptuously. You shall not be afraid of him. Different way of phrasing that, you shall not listen to him. Don't listen to the prophet who speaks a word and that word does not come to pass. That's a litmus test. And the Lord uses that very, very powerfully. Prophets frequently revealed events to take place beyond the lifetime of their audience. They spoke into the future. And the Lord did that through the prophets, providing a short-term, partial fulfillment for a longer-term prophecy. Because there is this standard that the Jewish community has. They stone prophets that prophesy falsely. They were not to listen to him. They were not to fear him. In fact, they were to stone him. If he had not spoken, if he spoke as a prophet but did not speak for the Lord. So these events, God's pretty serious about them. He had a purpose for these prophetic events, for these statements that were made about things that are to come. Really, there's two purposes. One is to get information out, and the other is to validate prophecies that were spoken, valid prophecies spoken by the prophet that weren't going to take place for a long time. How do you get around that? This is the way the Lord does it. How do you get around the fact that prophets will prophesy? They will prophesy about events that may not happen for 1,000 years. Or 2,000 years or more. So how do you determine if you are a Jewish person, if you're part of the Jewish community, how do you determine that that prophet is true? The Lord will give that prophet other prophecies about the same event that will be a shorter term partial fulfillment. He'll give that prophet words to speak that will be prophetic, and that will, it's almost confusing to look at it sometimes because it seems like Well, that's been fulfilled already. When in fact, it may not have been fulfilled completely. That's where really serious diligence is required to determine if we're reading something accurately, if we're looking at it in a proper context, if we are really understanding what God is saying. Numerous partial fulfillments in Scripture serve as examples of this. One comes to mind is from John 5. Speaking to Israel, Jesus said, "I have come in my Father's name, and you do not accept me. But if someone else comes in his own name, you will accept him." Does anybody know who that's referring to? It's the Antichrist. He's not going to be there for a long time. There will be another who will come, but there also will be one that comes shortly that will appear to be the Antichrist, while in fact, he is actually an Antichrist. Jesus said, "I have come in my Father's name and you do not accept me, but if someone else comes in his own name, you will accept him." He was referring to Antichrist, who many in Israel will believe to be the Messiah when he comes. And he'll come, he will arrive at the beginning of Daniel's 70th week. Or he'll be here before then, I'm pretty sure of that, but he won't be on the stage. He won't be in place. He won't really arrive until right at the beginning point for Daniel's 70th week. And we've been over that several times, so we don't want to go back and dwell on that. Just before Jesus was handed over to be executed, Pilate offered to free him as a sign of Roman mercy. Traditionally, at Passover, the Romans gave the people a choice. Choose one person and they'll be set free. So you would think you've got Jesus and you've got Barabbas. You've got a convicted thief, murderer, liar, and you've got the man who had never sinned. He gave them the choice. The convicted killer named Barabbas. That's who they chose to set free. It's a partial fulfillment. Validated the Lord's prophecy of Israel and the Antichrist in the 70th week. The destruction of Israel in 79 AD was another partial fulfillment. Validated the Lord's prophecy of the end times as prophesied by Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Matthew 24. And Jesus went out and departed from the temple, and his disciples came up to him to show him the buildings of the temple. And Jesus said to them, "Do you not see all these things? Assuredly, I say to you, not one stone shall be left here upon another, that shall not be thrown down." Wow. Now, as he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, "Tell us, when will these things be? And what will be the sign of your coming of the end of the age?" And Jesus answered and said to them, "Take heed that no one deceives you. For many will come in my name, saying, 'I am the Christ,' and will deceive many." And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not troubled, for all these things must come to pass. But the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines, pestilences, earthquakes in various places. All of these are the beginning of sorrow. Then they will deliver you up to tribulation and kill you. And you will be hated by all nations for my name's sake. And then many will be offended, will betray one another, and they will hate one another. Then many false prophets will rise and deceive many. And because lawlessness will abound, the love of many will grow cold, but he who endures to the end shall be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a witness to all the nations, and then the end will come. And then the end will come. Matthew chapter 24, most commonly referenced scripture regarding the Olivet Discourse. 2 days before the cross, 4 disciples came to Jesus with 3 questions. We just read why. They came to him with 3 questions because they were confused. They really were. They were not trying to be smart about it. They were not trying to provoke him. They honestly had sincere questions that they didn't have an answer for. And they wanted an answer. They asked him in all sincerity. And the reason I did that was he baffled them. Because one of the disciples had commented earlier on the beauty of the temple. And Jesus said, it's going to be broken. It's going to be crashed. Predicted its destruction. That was not an easy thing for them to take. They had reason to be very confused at the prospect that their temple would be destroyed. Because they were good Jews. They knew that this was the beginning of the 70th week. In that 70th week, the Jews, are supposed to accomplish many things. Most of them, or many of them, required a temple. How could it be? This temple had been under construction under Herod for 48, 50 years. It wasn't done yet. It wasn't even finished. And Jesus is telling them it's all going to be crashed. It's all going to just fall down. It's going to collapse. He predicted its destruction, and that absolutely confused them. They thought they were nearing the end of the age. That's why they kept asking him if he was now going to restore the kingdom. How many times did they ask him? I didn't bother to go count them up, but it's a lot. Now? Are we there yet? Are we there yet? Now, Lord, are you going to restore the kingdom today? Is this it? Is this the event? Is this what the trigger is? Now you're going to restore the kingdom? Why was that such a question to them? It was a question to them, a sincere question, because they thought that Messiah would come, although that wasn't fully understood by them, what he would do, but they understood that Messiah would arrive at the end of the 483 years. So here is someone that they think is Messiah, and he's telling them the temple is going to be destroyed. That's why they kept asking him if he's going to now restore the kingdom. And now he has told them everything is going to be torn down. So they had questions. Big questions. Big questions. 3 of them in particular in the Olivet Discourse. 3 of them are touched on by those 4 disciples. 3 disciples actually wrote it down. John didn't write it. His focus was elsewhere. They're addressed in Matthew 24, Mark 13, and Luke 21. Luke is the only one of those 3 that even answered the first question. The others went right past it and jumped to the next subject. The 3 questions: when will this happen? Well, what that's referencing is the temple's destruction. That was a big one. The temple's going to be destroyed when? What's happening? Can we stop it? It's important. That was very upsetting to any Jew who understood what history was going to be and what it had been. When will the temple be destroyed, Lord? What will be the signs of your coming, your second coming? And what will be the signs of the end of the age? They had no clue at this moment. Keep this in mind when you think about what they're going to say, what we're going to read tonight, what we're going to reference. These men had no idea about the church. They didn't have a clue. They had no way to know about the church. As far as they knew, when Jesus was speaking to them, he was speaking to his Jewish disciples. It was 40 years from this point on, roughly 40 years, it was a long time, before John made the decision that the church was going to be accepted. It didn't get accepted. It didn't exist until the Acts. The book of Acts is where the church begins. These guys had no clue. And really, being honest with myself, I couldn't read the Bible and figure out. It's in the Old Testament. All that Jesus came to do and did is in the Old Testament, but there's no way I could figure that out with the Lord illuminating it. And he hadn't done so yet. So they had no way to understand church. They had no way to understand the perspective of church. They were just Jewish. And that's the only perspective they could see. And only Luke recorded his response to the first one. Luke began his account like Matthew. Luke 21, verse 8, he said, "Take heed that you be not deceived." Well, that's what Jesus said. So Luke is recording that. "For many will come in my name, saying, 'I am he,' and the time is drawn near. Therefore, do not go after them." Oh, when somebody comes and tells you that, don't go after them. "But when you hear of wars and commotions, do not be afraid. For these things must come to pass first, but the end will not come immediately." Then he said to them, "Nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. And there will be great earthquakes in various places, and famines and pestilences, and there will be fearful sights and great signs from heaven." Then, in Luke 21, 12 through 24, the Lord backed up and inserted the answer to the first question. So his first reaction to them is to tell them, listen, there are going to be people who are going to come along and they're going to tell you they're a prophet, they're going to tell you they're the Messiah, they're going to tell you, don't believe them. Don't follow them. Just listen to my words. Now in Luke, the next 12 verses, he backed up and answered the first question. This portion of Luke's account deals with events leading up to and including the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. What a concept. Can you imagine being one of them, knowing that you're in the last 7 years, knowing that you're standing, or you think, by faith, I'm going to just say knowing that you're sitting next to Messiah, and he's telling you that everything is going to be exploded, everything's going to fall apart. How is he going to fix that in 7 years? The legitimate question to ask is, when is this going to happen? Tell us what's going to be. How are we going to know when this happens? What do we do? So he's giving them a very direct answer. And in Luke, we have the recording of what he says that's a little different than Matthew and Mark. Luke 21, 12 through 24. "But before all these things, they will lay their hands on you and persecute you, delivering you up to the synagogues and the prisons." Nice. "You will be brought before kings and rulers for my name's sake, but it will turn out for you on an occasion of testimony." That's a blessing. Talking to his disciples, to his Jewish disciples. You're going to be brought before kings and rulers for my sake, my name's sake. It will turn out for you as an occasion of testimony. Therefore, settle it in your hearts, not to meditate beforehand on what you will answer. For I will give you a mouth and wisdom, which all of your adversaries will not be able to contradict or resist. You will be betrayed even by parents and brothers, relatives, friends, and they will put some of you to death. And you will be hated by all for my name's sake, but not a hair on your head shall be lost. By your patience, possess your souls. But when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then know that its desolation is near. When you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, know its desolation is near. We talked about this in fairly good depth last week. But I want to review it tonight. Then, let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let those who are in the midst of her depart. And let those who are in the country not enter her. For these are the days of vengeance, that all things which are written may be fulfilled. But woe to those who are pregnant and those who are nursing babies in those days. For there will be great distress in the land, and wrath upon this people. And they will fall by the edge of the sword and be led away captive into all nations. And Jerusalem will be trampled by Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. So there is a time that we're talking about here. That there is a time of the Gentiles. And in time, there's always a finite beginning and a finite end. This is a powerful prophecy. He's telling them nothing about an abomination that causes desolation in the temple. He doesn't say that. It's not in here. He references when you see the city surrounded by soldiers, when the military has you hemmed in, and this is me adding my own part, and there's no escape, then run to the mountains. That has to be confusing. What do you mean? When the Romans in this time, when they would take a city captive, would lay siege to it by building an encampment around the entire city. And they wouldn't let anyone in or out. They wouldn't let any supplies in or out. They wouldn't let any water in or out. So only to the extent that a city was self-sustaining could it survive. And there's a limitation on how long any city could survive under those circumstances. Woe to those who are pregnant and to those who are nursing babies in those days when you're surrounded by the Romans. But as we said last week, the commander of the Roman army packed his bags and went to Rome to assume the role of the leader. Nero was killed, and Vespasian went to Rome to assume the throne. When he went to Rome to assume the throne, he left his son, Titus, in charge. Maintain the siege. Don't let the Jews go out, because they'll just go out and they'll buy a bunch of supplies, and that'll just postpone this whole thing. So he kept them under siege. Except he did capture the crown. He became the emperor. And there was a lot of unrest. So he called for his son to break camp and come to Rome to help him to quell the violence and to secure his throne. So something that never happened. In the middle of a siege, this is in 69 to 70 AD. In the middle of the siege of Jerusalem, all the troops packed up their bags and went back to Rome. Well, they just barely got underway, and what happened? The Christians knew these words from Luke. The Christians in that community were Jews. They were Jewish Christians. They're living in Jerusalem. There really were not very many very many Greek or Gentile Christians yet. There were some. But all of these believers who were in Jerusalem as a testimony to their Jewish brethren, they understood the words of Luke. And bizarre as it might seem, while they looked around, in the middle of a siege, there came an opportunity to get out of town. That never happens. So they did not hesitate. They all packed a bag and left. They probably didn't even pack a bag. They probably just left. Get me out of here. And they did not try to come back in. So when the throne was secured, Vespasian came back to reestablish the siege of Jerusalem. The Jews didn't get out. Over 1 million of them died a slow, painful death. And they will fall by the edge of the sword to be led away captive into all nations, and Jerusalem will be trampled by Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. Next, now we got this down, we're thinking, okay, we're talking about 70 AD, but the next thing he does is he continues with his prophecy by moving, without even hesitating, he moves right over into the end of time, to the end of the age, if you will. And there will be signs in the sun, in the moon, and in the stars, and on the earth, distress of nations with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring, men's hearts failing them from fear and from the expectation of those things which are coming on the earth. For the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Then they will see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory. Now these things began to happen. Now when these things begin to happen, look up and lift up your heads because your redemption draws near. Then he spoke to them in parable. Look at the fig tree and all the trees. When they are already budding, you see and know for yourselves that summer is now near. So also when you see these things happening, know that the kingdom of God is near. Assuredly, I say to you, this generation will by no means pass away till all things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will by no means pass away. But take heed yourselves, lest your hearts be weighed down with carousing, drunkenness, and cares of this world, of this life, and the day come on you unexpectedly, for it will come as a snare on all those who dwell on the face of the earth. The ones who dwell on the face of the earth dwellers, those are the ones whose heart is in this world. Those are the ones whose heart is not in heaven. Their heart is not with Jesus. Their heart is here. Their kingdom is here. Their world is here. Next, a final warning to the disciples in verse 36 concerning the first century destruction of Jerusalem. Watch therefore and pray always that you may be counted worthy to escape all these things that may come to pass and to stand before the Son of Man. Does this match history? It does. It does. Within an already but not yet format. There are prophecies that would appear, unless you study them really very carefully, that would look to be fulfilled. There are prophecies that have been fulfilled. There are some, however, where there is a two-part fulfillment. Or maybe more in the case of an antichrist. There have been many antichrists through the centuries. But the final one, has not come yet. But when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then know that its desolation is near. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let those who are in the midst of her depart, and let those who are in the country not enter her. For these are the days of vengeance, that all things which are written may be fulfilled. But woe to those who are pregnant, to those who are nursing babies in those days, for it will be great distress in the land, and wrath upon his people, this people. And they will fall by the edge of the sword and be led away captive into all nations, and Jerusalem will be trampled by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. If you were speaking to a Christian, if I speak to this group, some parts of that don't really make sense. If you were speaking to a group of Jews in the first century, you'd have a different perspective. There were a lot of rules that they had to obey, that they were called upon to obey. They could only go so far on a Sabbath. They were not allowed to. A Sunday afternoon walk in the forest probably wouldn't happen. That was a day of rest. Saturday. Most of Luke's passage is identical to Matthew's, but there are two striking differences showing us they're not really describing the same event. Matthew says the sign that it's time to flee, the sign that says it's time to flee from Matthew is the abomination of desolation standing in the holy place. That is the statue erected in the temple that is put there and that everybody is forced to worship. It desolates the temple. It corrupts the temple. It makes it unusable, unuseful. That's what Matthew says. Luke says it's the positioning of the Roman army around Jerusalem. That's already been fulfilled. But the abomination is not. Josephus says that all the Christians escaped to Jerusalem before it collapsed. So the sign that it's time to flee to the mountains, both of them speak of fleeing to the mountains, but it's a different sign. One says it's time to flee to the mountains when you see the abomination of desolation, the abomination that causes desolation. Standing in the holy place, that would be in the temple. The other says, Luke says, that when you see the city surrounded by the army, flee to the mountains. Now, normally, as I said earlier, that couldn't happen. Once they got you encircled, you were done. It's just a matter of time. But they actually pulled stakes and went back to Rome, and then turned around and came back again. Matthew's version ends with the second coming. Luke describes the Jewish diaspora and the control of Jerusalem by the Gentiles, describing events concerning the fall of Jerusalem that were fulfilled within the lifetime of the Lord's audience, validating the ultimate fulfillment at the end of the age. It's a already fulfillment that validates the prophet and validates the prophecies. So you're looking further out and you can see, oh, this is really valid. Oh, the prophets said so and they're in agreement. Already, but not yet. Luke 21, 25 through 28. And there will be signs in the sun and the moon and the stars, and on the earth distress of nations with perplexity, and the sea and the waves roaring, men's hearts failing them for fear in the expectation of those things which are coming on the earth. For the power of the heavens will be shaken. It'll be an awesome time. Then they will see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory. Now, when these things begin to happen, look up, lift up your heads, because your redemption draws nigh. When you begin to see these things, when these things are happening, look up. Now, the Lord explained his answer to include the whole world and the end of the age. Those alive on the earth, when the signs begin, are to understand that the concluding event will be the Lord's return. If you're still here, when these things start to happen, You should understand, you should study and understand that the concluding event in this will be the Lord's return, just like Matthew said and just like Mark said. But the believers are admonished that when we begin to see these signs, we should start looking at the sky in expectation, because the Lord's coming soon. He's coming for us. Luke's version of the Olivet Discourse covered both the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD and blended smoothly into the end time, to the second coming. Now you can see the partial fulfillment of the Lord's prophecy recorded in the first century destruction of Jerusalem, confirming the ultimate fulfillment of coming soon to the end of the entire world. So, if the answer to the first question, tell us, when will these things be? And the answer is, when you see the Roman army surrounding Jerusalem, plus more. Then 70 AD, and then later, much later, second coming. What's next? The next question will be, what will be the signs of your second coming? What will be the signs of the end of the age? Let's go back and look a little bit more at the Olivet Discourse to find Jesus' answers. Back to Matthew 24:3. Now, as he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, "Tell us, when will these things be, and what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?" One of our frequent mistakes when reading the Bible is caused by our tendency to see everything through church-colored glasses. We read it as if everything in it is directly applicable to us, and it probably is, but perhaps we need to study it and understand how. We can't disregard context and historical background. The word itself is key, the word itself is prime, but understanding it is facilitated by knowing a little, at least, about the context and its historical background. Paul said everything that was written in the past was written to teach us. For whatever, in Romans 15, for whatever things were written before were written for our learning, that we, through the patience and comfort of the Scriptures, might have hope. Doesn't mean it was written, that everything was written about us, where we're the subject. It does mean that it's written for us. We're supposed to learn from those who came before us. We're supposed to learn from those disciples. One example can be found in our reading of the Olivet Discourse. Then Jesus went out and departed from the temple, and his disciples came up to him and showed him the buildings of the temple. And Jesus said to them, "Do you not see all these things? Assuredly, I say to you, not one stone shall be left here upon another that shall not be thrown down." These two verses set the tone for the entire discussion. And we tend to go by them because that's not the fun part. From Mark's account, we know that after Jesus said this, 4 disciples came to him for clarification: Peter, James, John, and Andrew. Mark 13, now as he sat on the Mount of Olives opposite the temple, Peter, James, John, and Andrew asked him privately. So these 4 guys. When will this happen? When will we see the buildings torn down? What will be the sign of your coming? And what will be the sign of the end of the age? So let's look at them individually to gain more of the background, that prompted these questions. The first 2 were pretty simple. The third one is a bit different, a bit more difficult to pin down. Luke's Olivet Discourse account of this is found in Luke 21, and we've already looked at that in detail. He's the only one who recorded a detailed answer to this first question: when will this happen? It isn't because the others were lax. It was because he was given that chore. He was given that task. He was the one who was positioned to do that. And his answer was a description of the Roman conquest that was still future, significantly off in the future when this conversation took place. What will be the sign of your coming? The second question addresses his second coming. He actually gave them two clear signs. After describing several things that would not be specific signs, but merely birth pangs, like Braxton Hicks contractions, they're not the real deal yet, but it certainly feels like it when you're there, so I'm told. He actually gave them two answers after he describes the birth pangs. First clear sign is Matthew 24:15. Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, whoever reads, let him understand. It's the abomination of desolation standing in the holy place. It will mark the beginning of the Great Tribulation. That's the last 3.5 years of Daniel's 70th week. The first clear sign. For then there will be great tribulation such as not been since the beginning of the world until this time. No, nor shall it ever be. The second sign of his coming is described in the sign of the Son of Man. It will signal the great tribulation's end. So there's a sign at the beginning of it and a sign at the end of it. In Matthew 24:29-30, immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened and the moon will not give its light. The stars will fall from heaven and the powers of the heaven will be shaken. Then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in heaven, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. After that, the Lord will return on the clouds with power and great glory. What will be the sign of the end of the age? This question is harder. It's more complex, even though the answer is kind of basically simple. The details of that answer are tricky. Ultimately, the sign of the end of the age will be the Lord's return to become king of the whole earth. Zechariah 14:9 says, and the Lord shall be king over all the earth. In that day it shall be, the Lord is one, and his name one. After that, the kingdom age will begin. This is the one where so many believers are way off. It's those church-colored glasses. But when you understand the disciples' perspective, you'll see that it's not possible for them to be thinking about the church age here when they use the phrase end of the age. And here's why. 500 plus years previously, Gabriel told Daniel how and when the end of the age would come. The 70 weeks. The end of the 70th week. From the time they received permission to restore and rebuild Jerusalem, and this is after the Babylonian captivity, there would be 70 periods of 7 years each that would give us a total of 490 years. 70 weeks. When his disciples posed their question to Jesus, 483 of those years had come and gone. And we know that because part of that prophecy that was given to Daniel says that at the end of that 483rd period, 483-year period, Messiah would come. And true to form, he was there right on time. And that he would be cut off, that he would be executed, but not for himself. He wouldn't be murdered. He wouldn't be killed because of his own sin. It would be because of theirs. But they had 483 years already completed. They were all done. They were in the background. 7 years left. Imagine their astonishment. He told them that just when the end is in sight, the temple, they're looking, they just left the temple. It's built, it's functional. And they know there's 7 years left. And the things that they are to accomplish in 7 years. And the temple had been under construction for 48 years. Still not finished. How could you destroy this and rebuild it? And it was essential for their worship. How could it be torn down so completely and rebuilt in just 7 years? It was this astonishment that had led to their questions, the 3 questions that they brought to the Lord. They brought those questions because they were astounded at the notion of the temple being destroyed. And there's only 7 years to get everything redone and to finish the temple and to make an end to sin and to complete all of the tasks that were there to be done. They didn't know anything about a church age, a 2,000-year pause in Daniel's 70 weeks prophecy. It just didn't occur to them. They didn't just... It's in the Old Testament. But they didn't know. It's easy for me to look back and to study things and to make sense of them because I'm a Christian and I live in the 21st century and I can look back over history and I can see these events taking place. If I was a faithful Jewish man who had been invited by this radical rabbi that I believed was going to be Messiah, if I'd been invited to follow him, I would have been excited. Especially because I knew it was already the 483rd year or something pretty close to that. But that 483rd year was just about to finish. And that we were just about to turn the corner into the 7 final years. They didn't know anything about the church. Even today, most of us don't understand that the church age didn't end the age of the law. It put it on hold. It interrupted it 7 years short of its scheduled completion. How could they have understood that? The fact that the age of the law hasn't ended explains why there will be a temple erected in Israel soon, because they'll need one to complete the final 7 years. 40 days after the resurrection, after receiving the Holy Spirit, and we see this in John 20:22, the disciples were still thinking of the end of the first age. They were thinking that it was time. Are you going to establish the kingdom now? It'd be really good if we could just get this going, Lord. It's looking like getting kind of scary. Will you at this time, when Acts 1:7-8, when Jesus led them up to the Mount of Olives, they asked him, Lord, are you at this time going to restore the kingdom to Israel? And once again, he didn't explain anything, but he just said, it's not for you to know the times or the dates the Father has set by his authority. James revealed this answer to the apostles for the first time 20 years after the cross. Acts 15:12-17. Then all the multitude kept silent and listened to Barnabas and Paul, declaring how many miracles and wonders God had worked through them among the Gentiles. And after they had become silent, James answered, saying, Men and brethren, listen to me. Simon has declared how God at the first visited the Gentiles to take out of them a people for his name. And with this, the words of the prophets agree, as it is written, after this I will return and will rebuild the tabernacle of David, which has fallen down. I will rebuild its ruins, and I will set it up so that the rest of mankind may seek the Lord. Even all the Gentiles who are called by my name, says the Lord, who does all these things. In effect, James told them that Israel was being set aside while the Lord took a people for him among the Gentiles for himself. He was referring to the church. And after he had taken us, literally carried us away, rapture topic there, he would turn his attention back to the Jews. If the Lord had taught them these things, James wouldn't have had to explain them. It wasn't that they had heard this and forgotten it. It's that the Lord never told them. Some things are yet to be discovered. And some things are yet to be discovered by us next week when we pick this up. Selah. Thank you, Alex.